Why doesn't the Kuomintang launch a counterattack on the mainland to save the 1.4 billion compatriots in dire straits? Many friends on the mainland have expressed their expectation of the Kuomintang's military intervention. Of course, some people on the mainland have called for Taiwan to counterattack the mainland, and correspondingly, Taiwan also has many friends who criticize the mainland. We say that Taiwan is not willing to counterattack the mainland because of its limited strength, but the mainland's economic and military strength far exceeds that of Taiwan. Why is China still allowing Taiwan to act recklessly today? This is the topic we want to discuss today. Let's first look at the Communist Party's perspective on why Taiwan needs to be liberated. Only when you understand this question can you know whether the Communist Party is likely to give up on Taiwan. After the founding of the People's Republic of China, Fujian province was not heavily developed for a long time. Looking at the southeastern coast of China, there are 4 provinces of Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Fujian, and Guangdong. In 2020, Guangdong and Jiangsu's GDP both exceeded 10 trillion yuan. Zhejiang is relatively poor but still has over 6 trillion yuan, while Fujian has only 4,400 billion yuan. The main reason is that the government is afraid of building up Fujian province and then having it destroyed by the war across the strait. Since they know that the house may be demolished in the future, they naturally will not spend a lot of money on decoration. Similarly, the Kuomintang has no intention of developing Taiwan. The logic is actually the same: it's better to buy more airplanes if you have the money. The game played across the strait is not Island Tycoon, but Red Alert. In essence, the mainland and Taiwan are still in a civil war, and the threat to the coastal cities of the mainland cannot be resolved without resolving the Taiwan issue. With the advancement of military technology, not to mention Fujian, Taiwan's missiles can even cover Shanghai. When South Korea deployed THAAD, China was very angry. If Taiwan, which can cover the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta, uses its firepower, it becomes even more critical. Therefore, the first reason for the problem is the national defense issue. Once the homeland defense is breached, the second issue is that China has to go out. I don't think I need to spend too many words on this issue. Taiwan is located in the first island chain designed by the United States to lock China. Many people may not know the power of Taiwan's first island chain. Before China and the United States established diplomatic relations, due to the first island chain, the ships of the People's Republic of China were unable to pass through the northern and southern ports for 30 years. In 1968, China had to go around the Pacific to open up the north-south route. This is also why Hong Kong's shipping was relatively developed in the last century, because Hong Kong ships could sail along the coast of the mainland with the same ships that mainlanders couldn't. This is actually very humiliating. Now China's navy is much stronger and can break through the first island chain. But you have to understand one thing: the islands on the first island chain are still there. They have not disappeared. The so-called breakthrough of the first island chain now means that the navy's strength has improved, and they can be sent out, but it doesn't mean that they can go out with no losses during wartime. There is a big difference here. It's like when you turn 18 and can finally go to the red light district. But if it comes to a real fight, it's hard to say how long you can hold on. To completely avoid taking chances, the best way is to not have a red light district. We are looking at Xi Jinping's Maritime Silk Road, which is actually circumventing the first island chain. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, was created as an alternative because China could not compete with the US in the maritime domain. Taiwan is the bridgehead of the first island chain whether it wants to or not. Therefore, the problem is about resolving China's strategy to expand its influence globally. The third issue is that China has been influenced by separatist forces within the country. In addition to Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet are also seeking independence. Many Taiwanese friends say that Taiwan has essentially become independent, with its own president, judiciary, and military, even if unification with the mainland occurs. Under the one country, two systems framework, the central government would not receive any substantial benefits. It would be only nominal unification, provided that peaceful unification occurs. However, if unification occurs through military means, it would be a different story. This statement is partially true. Indeed, in terms of the economy, unification would not increase China's overall GDP, and the mainland would not try to take advantage of Taiwan. However, politically, it would be a different matter. If we allow it, the morale of separatist forces will undoubtedly increase. It is similar to the June 4th incident. Once you make concessions or show weakness on a critical issue, the other side will press on step by step. If you become independent today, the other side will become independent tomorrow, and the country will gradually fall apart. Therefore, the Chinese government takes the issue of national division very seriously. When a country raises an issue to a certain height, or it becomes a core interest, sometimes it is not related to direct interests. To put it bluntly, it is a face issue. When I say that the Taiwan issue is my core interest, other countries cannot touch it without losing face. If I don't work hard to resolve the problem, I am just slapping myself in the face. The Communist Party of China also faces internal pressure. I remember a social and natural science class I took when I was young, which introduced some characteristics of different provinces, with a particular emphasis on Sun Moon Lake in Taiwan. Before I went abroad, I didn't know that the People's Republic of China did not manage Taiwan. In the past, domestic propaganda tended to avoid the subject and emphasized sovereignty, rather than governance. Additionally, the media constantly emphasized that Taiwan's most beautiful scenery is its people, and that the Kuomintang is corrupt and incompetent. This made mainland Chinese people think that Taiwanese people were being persecuted by the Kuomintang and that they were always inclined to reunify with the motherland. I don't know what kind of education children in China are receiving these days, but I do know that our generation grew up being taught that Taiwan is a part of China. However, with the development of the internet, we have discovered that we were partly deceived. Taiwan has not been reunified and the majority of Taiwanese people do not like the mainland. But China has never stopped promoting the idea that Taiwan is a part of China, so the logic goes, Taiwan is China's, Taiwanese people don't like China, if you don't let us have the island, we'll beat the crap out of you. It's not about whether the Chinese government wants to reunify with Taiwan anymore, it's about whether the Chinese people will allow the government to not reunify with Taiwan. While many Chinese people may not like the Communist Party, over 99% of them believe that Taiwan is a part of China. If China were a pure democracy, Taiwan would have already been bombed several times. Taiwanese friends, don't be skeptical. I have talked about it before in those videos about climbing over the wall. You really don't have to take the wolf warrior Little Pink on YouTube too seriously. China's internet mobs can crush the little pinks with their pathetic logic and vocabulary. Especially after Xi Jinping amended the constitution to seek re-election, I don't know where the news came from that Xi Jinping's amendment was to recover Taiwan. Regardless of whether it is true or not, after most people equate the amendment with the recovery of Taiwan, Xi Jinping's pressure is very great. Therefore, China's propaganda for many years has naturally formed a demand for reunification internally. As you can see, it involves China's national defense expansion strategy, internal separatism, external image, and the people's name, so China cannot give up the recovery of Taiwan. Some may ask, after all this talk, why hasn't China recovered Taiwan? Let's move forward in time. The Communist Party began the Crossing the Yangtze River campaign in late April 1949, which was commanded by General Su Yu. Su Yu was the leader of the three armed services and the first military man of the CCP's East China Bureau. 3 months before the Crossing the Yangtze River campaign began, Mao Zedong had already included Taiwan in the East China Bureau's management scope. That is to say, before the CCP had occupied Nanjing, Mao Zedong had already appointed Su Yu to begin preparations. After the Crossing the Yangtze River campaign, how fast did the Kuomintang lose? On the night of April 23, the People's Liberation Army began crossing the river, and on the early morning of the 24th, it occupied the presidential palace in Nanjing. On May 3, it occupied Hangzhou, on May 22, it occupied Nanchang, and on May 28, it occupied Shanghai. In just 2 months, the People's Liberation Army had occupied regions including Su, Zhe, Gan, Wan, and Min. The key point is that the PLA's troops increased as they fought. In most cases, except for some important cities, when the Kuomintang saw the Communist Party, they turned and fled, and began to fight the Kuomintang behind them. On June 14, the Central Military Commission ordered General Su Yu and General Zhang Zhen to begin studying how to take Taiwan. On June 21, the Central Military Commission clearly instructed the East China Bureau to complete preparations in the summer and autumn of 1949 and capture Taiwan in the winter. Preparations then began. In July, the East China Bureau conducted amphibious landing training with 3 armies and 2 artillery battalions from the 9th Army Group outside Shanghai. In August, another army was assigned to the 9th Army Group and joined the preparations. These 4 armies were all equipped with American weapons and were the elite among the elite of the PLA. At the same time, based on a batch of ships obtained from Nanjing, Shanghai, Jiangyin, and other places after the crossing the Yangtze River campaign, Su Yu created the East China Navy. There were only about 10 real warships, and the rest were small transport ships. At this time, there were only over 100,000 troops on Taiwan Island, but in the Liberation War, Taiwan's air and naval forces did not suffer significant losses. At this time, Taiwan still had more than 400 fighter planes and more than 50 warships. The development of the Air Force and Navy was not achieved overnight. At that time, the only country that China could turn to for help was the Soviet Union. In July, Mao Zedong telegraphed Liu Shaoqi, who was still in Moscow, to ask him to inquire whether the Soviet Union could provide assistance, but was rejected by Stalin. Stalin's reason was that supporting the CCP in liberating Taiwan would cause dissatisfaction in the United States and could even lead to a Third World War. The Jinmen battle occurred after that. Before the Jinmen battle, Su Yu had 3 conditions not to attack. 1 is not to attack when reinforcements arrive, 2 is not to attack when there are no suspected ships carrying 6 regiments, and 3 is not to attack when there are no experienced 6,000 ship workers. As a result, all 3 conditions were met. The elite troops of the Hualien source ships could only carry 3 regiments, and the number of skilled ship workers was only 350. Regardless of whether the commander was reckless, the PLA really couldn't come up with enough ships at that time. After the failure of the Jinmen battle, although the PLA summed up the lessons of failure and prepared a large number of artillery in the island landing battle, taking advantage of the heavy rain and the inability of KMT planes to take off, they launched an attack but still failed, which was not caused by recklessness. Some may ask why the Communist Party was in such a hurry. Why not wait a few more months to prepare more ships? The answer is no, because Mao Zedong wanted to create a time difference. During and after the establishment of New China, the United States had a very good impression of the Communist Party. The Communist Party even applied for a loan from the United States, which was only rejected by the U.S. Congress. During the Liberation War, the United States did not go all out. In other words, neither side offended the other to death, and there was still room for reconciliation. On December 6, 1949, Mao Zedong flew to the Soviet Union to negotiate the Sino-Soviet Friendship, Alliance and Mutual Assistance Treaty. Originally, Stalin thought Mao Zedong was just a beggar and sent him away casually. Who knew that Mao Zedong directly asked the Soviet Union to return the Zhongchang Railway, Lushuan, and Dalian, causing the negotiations to reach an impasse. When the Sino-Soviet negotiations reached an impasse, Britain and the United States were happy. On January 5, 1950, U.S. President Truman issued a statement saying that the United States and its allies accepted China's right to exercise authority over Taiwan. Before that, his Secretary of State Acheson had just expressed the opinion that the KMT could not defend Taiwan. It is a matter of opinion as to which China is exercising authority over Taiwan. After Truman's statement, Acheson issued another statement saying that the Pacific Defense Line of the United States did not include the Korean Peninsula and Taiwan. In other words, the United States was willing to recognize that both the Korean Peninsula and Taiwan were within China's sphere of influence. On January 6, Britain directly broke off diplomatic relations with the Republic of China and established relations with the People's Republic of China. Therefore, at this time, the attitudes of Britain and the United States were: you can attack Taiwan at will, and we will not provide any assistance. Mao Zedong was aware that the United States and Britain only wanted to use China and that the only reliable ally at that time was the Soviet Union. By using the leverage of being courted by the United States and Britain, Stalin was forced to make concessions and agree to return the railway and the cities of Dalian and Lushuan. However, it was not wise to try to benefit from both sides in this kind of situation. In the context of the two superpowers' struggle for hegemony, if you don't pick a side, you may end up being targeted by both sides. Mao Zedong's decisive choice led China to align with the Soviet Union. On February 11, 1950, China and the Soviet Union signed a treaty of alliance. The United States and Britain were furious, as Mao Zedong had outmaneuvered them. Of course, they could not allow China to easily recover Taiwan again. From this point on, the difficulty of recovering Taiwan increased significantly. Therefore, in March 1950, the Communist Party of China postponed the timetable for recovering Taiwan to 1951. The Central Committee of the Communist Party of China decided to use 1/10 of the entire year's grain output to fund the recovery of Taiwan and placed a large order worth $300 million with the Soviet Union. The Central Military Commission was very clear-headed and did not urge Suyu and Zhu De to hurry up. Instead, they specifically told the East China Bureau not to rush and that they would coordinate the ships, equipment, troops, and especially the Air Force. Now, let's talk about the Korean War. The Korean War was initiated at the behest of the Soviet Union, which gained the greatest benefits. Some viewers may not like to hear this and insist that I conclude that China won many victories to be satisfied. Today, I will briefly talk about it. In February 1950, Stalin demanded that Kim Il-sung secretly go to Moscow, without revealing it to other comrades, especially China. Later, North Korea began to attack South Korea. Of course, the 823 artillery war was not that simple. I saw a report that said Khrushchev was very dissatisfied with Mao Zedong's decision to start the 823 artillery war. I was puzzled because it was China's internal war. What business was it of his? I did a little more research and found that the plan for the Kinmen shelling had already been made by the Fujian military in April, so why did they wait until August? In mid-July, the Iraqi Revolution broke out and established the Iraqi Republic, and Iraq became pro-communist from pro-Western, leading to British and American military intervention. On August 11, the United States issued a memorandum about not recognizing the communist government. Then, on August 23 the Kinmen shelling occurred, and the United States was alarmed, thinking that China was going to recapture Taiwan, so they immediately sent a carrier fleet to the Taiwan Strait. As a result, the pressure on the Middle Eastern revolutionaries suddenly dropped. This is a good thing for the communist cause. Why was Khrushchev angry? The reason is simple: who's the boss, you or me? It's such a face-saving thing, and you didn't even give me notice, so I did it. I didn't even get any credit for it. So, I think the August 23 artillery battle was also about China competing with the Soviet Union for the discourse power of the communist world. The reason why China fell out with the Soviet Union is also a long story, which we won't go into today. Later, during the Cultural Revolution in China, Liu Shaoqi was persecuted and labeled as China's Khrushchev. You can probably guess that there was a significant ideological rift between China and the Soviet Union. Although the impact of the Cultural Revolution on the military was relatively small, many senior officers were criticized. If we were to attack Taiwan, we would have to rely on Yi Fei. Although Yi Fei failed in Kinmen, Mao Zedong still put him in charge of the Fujian military region. During the Cultural Revolution, Yi Fei was accused of collaborating with foreign countries because he had relatives in the Philippines. This is ridiculous. The Cultural Revolution lasted for 10 years, so it was impossible to persuade Taiwan during that time, and no one had the energy to deal with Taiwan. In 1976, with Mao Zedong's death, the Cultural Revolution came to an end. After Hua Guofeng, Wang Dongxing, and Yi Jianying launched the Huaran Hall incident, the power structure of the Communist Party of China was still very unstable. Hua Guofeng always opposed Deng Xiaoping's return to power. It took Deng Xiaoping more than 2 years to bring Hua Guofeng down. After Deng Xiaoping firmly established his power, the United States and China established diplomatic relations on January 1, 1979. Also in January, the Chinese Ministry of National Defense announced the formal end of the Kinmen artillery battle. At the same time, the National People's Congress issued a statement to the Taiwan compatriots. Then, Deng Xiaoping put forward the concept of peaceful reunification and one country, two systems. At this time, China's top priority was economic development, not reunification. Deng Xiaoping and Chiang Ching-kuo had a tug-of-war for some time over the issue of reunification. Chiang Ching-kuo was not interested in the two regimes solution proposed by Deng Xiaoping. In fact, his meaning was quite clear: as long as Deng Xiaoping was willing to play the game of democracy and let the Kuomintang have a chance to return to the mainland, there was room for negotiation. For a long time, Taiwan has been secretly supporting various democratic movements on the mainland, including the later June 4 incident. The struggle between the high-level officials was their own affair. After Deng Xiaoping came to power, economic ties between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait became increasingly close. Before 1991, Taiwan regarded investment in the mainland as illegal, so many Taiwanese businessmen invested in the mainland by registering their companies in Hong Kong and other places. For example, in the mainland, the Taiwanese company Red Flag is just a Hong Kong company. Later, the Taiwan authorities realized that this wasn't working out, and that Hong Kong and the Virgin Islands were making all the profits from the corporate taxes in Taiwan. Therefore, they opened up to investment from the mainland. Since 1991, Taiwanese investment in mainland China has accumulated to nearly $200 billion. Although this money is no longer important to China now, it played a significant role in boosting the Chinese economy during the early days of the country's economic reforms. Therefore, even after the death of Chiang Ching-kuo, there was a period of reconciliation between mainland China and Taiwan, although it did not last long. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in December 1991, China's importance to the United States decreased, and the U.S. began to support Taiwan and strengthen its military sales to the island. In 1995, Li Tenghui broke the 16-year-long tradition of no senior officials from the Republic of China visiting the U.S. and made an unofficial visit to the U.S. During this visit, he presented his views on the Republic of China in Taiwan. At that time, China was not as militarily powerful as it is now, but it still needed to express its attitude. Therefore, from July 1995 to March 1996, the People's Liberation Army conducted large-scale military exercises, including missile launches, sea defense and attack, and amphibious landings. They even used Dongfeng missiles as if they were cheap. The reason for the exercises to end in March was that there was a presidential election in Taiwan that month. Behind all these military exercises, there was a real military action plan. China planned to launch a real military action against Taiwan if Li Tenghui won the election that year. However, the plan was leaked to Taiwan by a Chinese spy, Major General Liu Lianquan. As a result, the U.S. dispatched the USS Nimitz and USS Independence aircraft carriers to the Taiwan Strait, and the People's Liberation Army faced its biggest humiliation since its formation. The Army modified the plan and adopted the three no's principle. 1. Missile launches would not fly over Taiwan. 2. The Navy and Air Force would not cross the Taiwan Strait. And 3. They would not occupy Taiwan's islands. The U.S. aircraft carrier fleet also sailed through the Taiwan Strait during China's military exercises. China had to endure this humiliation for a long time. After suffering such a great humiliation, Jiang Zemin showed admirable restraint and did not let his anger cloud his judgment or take any extreme actions against the U.S. Although some people may have considered him too subservient, Jiang's low-key approach bought China time. At that time, the U.S. had the power to completely suppress China. In 1996, during the Taiwan Strait crisis, Jiang immediately visited the U.S. in 1997 and successfully persuaded President Bill Clinton to support China's accession to the WTO. China successfully joined the WTO in 1999, and its economy began to develop rapidly. In 2001, the U.S. was hit by the 9/11 attacks and shifted its attention to the Middle East. China took advantage of this and developed rapidly in the following decade. Jiang Zemin even lived to see China launch its first domestically built aircraft carrier. Although the US remains a powerful nation, it may no longer dare to casually deploy its aircraft carriers near China's military demonstrations as it once did. Will Xi Jinping retake Taiwan during his tenure? Actually, it's a Schrödinger's unification problem. Anyone who says that Xi Jinping will definitely do it or definitely won't do it cannot say for sure until the last moment. Personally, I lean towards the idea that Xi Jinping will not use force to retake Taiwan. At the beginning, we mentioned the reasons why we cannot give up on Taiwan, and now let's talk about the disadvantages of using military force to attack Taiwan. Firstly, the possibility of peaceful unification is slim in the next 10 years. The education of Taiwanese people is to value democracy above all else, and they are very resistant to the mainland. Therefore, if Xi Jinping wants to unify Taiwan during his tenure, he can only do it through military means. While it is not difficult to take Taiwan by force, the real problems will come after that. Russia faced a lot of resistance when it tried to convince Crimea to reunite through a public referendum. If China uses military force to retake Taiwan, it will inevitably face even larger-scale sanctions. Many Chinese may say that they don't care about the sanctions, but that's just a statement made in a moment of excitement. Going from frugality to luxury is easy, but the opposite is difficult. People are the most ungrateful creatures. Public opinion is like flowing water. When people don't lack food, clothing, and enjoyment, retaking Taiwan is just a spiritual need. But once they are fed and clothed, they will have material needs again. Every ordinary person has the potential to become a scumbag, it just depends on whether there are the right conditions. Before the US invaded North Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, there was never a time when the people didn't support it. So before the attack, the people will certainly support it, but after the attack, there may be complaints. Secondly, there is the resistance of the Taiwanese people. Japan also had legal control over Taiwan, with guns, cannons, and money, but it took them more than 20 years to really control Taiwan, a generation's time. Therefore, it will take a long time and a lot of investment to win over the Taiwanese people after taking Taiwan by force. This will be a very large expenditure, especially under the premise of international sanctions. And the privileges given to the Taiwanese people may also cause dissatisfaction among the mainlanders. Most importantly, the existence of Taiwan can inspire the fighting spirit and cohesion of the Chinese people, just as the existence of the Communist Party can help the Democratic Progressive Party win elections. Taiwan is like the opposition party of China. And everyone should think, without the politicians and celebrities in Taiwan, lacking the comparison, will people still think that the Communist Party is good? It's like without Malaysia, Singapore would have nothing. Therefore, I believe that China will not allow Taiwan to be independent. But if there are no unexpected opportunities, the mainland is unlikely to use force to retake Taiwan. However, Taiwan may take matters into its own hands. Like Tsai Ing-wen's Double 10 speech, saying that the mainland and Taiwan are two countries that are not subordinate to each other, is already advocating for Taiwan's independence. Tsai Ing-wen's statement is a gamble. If the Democratic Progressive Party government continues to move in this direction and the Kuomintang becomes increasingly ineffective in serving as a brake, Xi Jinping may be forced to use force. Both sides of the Taiwan Strait will be the ultimate losers.